Hello and welcome to DIY Therapy. As always, we'll start with our disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not designed to diagnose or treat. When beginning an exercise program, it should be reviewed and discussed with your medical professional prior to beginning. Information on this podcast is not designed to replace medical treatment. My name is Will. With me, as always, is Andrew.
Booyah! I don't know why I said that. Maybe because we were dancing back and forth while you were doing that. You had a nice little rhythm to that.
You say booyah after you get done dancing?
I say booyah a lot, probably way too much, and it's way too much in my normal vernacular.
That sounds like a personal problem.
I have a lot of personal problems. Yeah.
There's this terrible show that my middle daughter, who is 6, loves. It's a Disney show called Andy Matt. No, I don't know. But it's basically like this girl is playing two twin sisters. It's one of those kind of shows, and one of them is like the former star and the kid star and singer, and the other one is like supposed to be athletic. But the one that's athletic always says, "Bam, what?" Like all of the time, and it's so irritating because it's like that's not a good catchphrase.
You need a different catchphrase. It's not working for you.
All right, what do you want to talk about today?
I have no idea. This is your show.
Ooh,
I'm just here for the ride.
Well, I say we talk about the effects of loading, which means, exercising, strengthening, weight training, anything like that. The effects of that sort of stuff on the different tissues in your body. Like, will it hurt you to go out and go for a run? Or other things, like carrying in things.
Yeah, and we thought this would be a good podcast topic because we've had patients recently that have come in and they have a lot of fear and anxiety of, hey, this area has been hurt, this area is injured, it's more sensitive, and it's been going on for quite a bit of time now. I'm afraid to essentially initiate anything because I don't want to injure it.
Or further injure it.
What's that?
Or further injure it a lot of times. Sometimes
or keep it around, keep the persistent pain around, whatever.
Or sometimes it's not even a correlated body part. Like their shoulder hurts, so they're afraid to do anything else, even just like walking, because they're afraid that it might make their shoulder hurt more.
Yeah, basically they're trying to wrap themselves in a bubble and essentially avoid anything and everything, which is one of the things that is always kind of a slippery slope. And we've talked a lot about some of our treatment philosophies, how when people are in really like a high sensitive state or a very acute phase of like the healing process where we have to manage our pain and be very cognizant of what we're doing and how we're triggering pain. And sometimes there is this time frame where we do actually have to avoid, limit, or modify specific activities that really agitate or provoke those symptoms. But that period of time is usually very small, and that's something that we emphasize a lot in the clinic. That there's this pain management phase, but it's short-lived. Once your pain starts to subside a bit, and once you get your pain under control, then it's time to start loading the tissue again. And loading the tissue, you kind of described it a little bit just a minute ago, but it's really any kind of strain or stress you're placing on it. Whatever it is, it can be a great deal of strain or stress, or it could be
going for a walk. It could be going up and down stairs. It
could be very small. It could be part of your functional activities. It could be very purposeful, where we're really trying to do just a general stretch, whatever it is, but some type of strain or stress on the tissues. And so that's really what we wanted to just kind of chat about today, and really some of the positive effects on different tissues throughout the body as you start to load them, even when there is pain or sensitivity that's involved in the area, but also just what happens in healthy tissue too. So I don't know, you want to, probably the most easy to explain and best in terms of your background is muscle, especially with your training background. You want to tackle that?
Yeah, obviously muscle makes sort of sense. You put stress on the muscle continuously, the muscle starts to adapt by getting bigger and stronger. It's pretty simple. everyone kind of understands that. They understand if I need to get stronger, they understand they need to do extraneous things rather than just like their normal day-to-day stuff to get stronger. Pretty self-explanatory. It's not overly complicated for muscles.
No, and so if you're dealing with like a muscle strain, the key is finding, like, so say you've got, tendinitis or an actual muscle strain. The key to all of this is trying to find basically the right amount of stimulus or strain that is going to allow the tissue to adapt, but at the same time not cause any further pain or irritation. And sometimes there can be a little bit of discomfort while you're doing some of these things, but if you're hurting 20 minutes after you've done specific exercise, you've probably done too much. If you're having a little bit of pain, or discomfort right after doing, let's just say we have bicep tendinitis or bicep strain, and you're doing arm curls with low weights, and you have no pain or you have very limited pain up to 10, 15 minutes, and then it goes away. That means you've probably done a good level of activity because you've strained the tissue, but it's not something that's causing any kind of long-term, irritation or inflammatory response. Now, if that pain lingers on even longer to where it's going, into that 25, 30, 40, 50-minute standpoint, now you've probably maybe done a little bit too much. So that's a good way to kind of gauge that. And I think that's, and then the other thing I think that's probably important for muscle to discuss in terms of muscles is, delayed muscle onset, right? Because there's a difference between that, right?
Yeah.
Delayed muscle onset.
That is generally people, they won't experience any sort of problems that immediately, or even like you say you exercise at like noon or even the morning or even at the evening, you won't feel any sort of like symptoms. You might feel a little bit weak just because you're exhausted yourself, but you won't feel any sort of like symptoms of pain until like the next day. And they'll just be sore from that day and then be even worse the second day, but then it just starts getting better from there. And that's relatively normal. That's just you've just introduced new activities to the muscles, and to affect change you have to go through a little bit of stress.
Yeah, and just a quick point that you mentioned. There's a big distinction between pain and soreness. Soreness is okay if it's reproducing your normal pain. If you're trying to kind of introduce new strengthening activities to an area that is already agitated and you're having that normal pain, that's where you've got to be cautious. But if you're having muscle soreness where it's just this kind of achy and you kind of have to move through it and it loosens up a little bit, the following day, that's all okay. That's actually a good thing. Muscle soreness, delayed muscle onset is actually brought on because as you go through any type of strengthening with the muscles, the muscle tissue is actually broken down, and that's where that delayed muscle soreness will come on, but it's actually built up stronger, so it's actually a good thing. That's something that I always want people to kind of understand. If they're a little sore afterwards the next day, that achy muscle soreness, that's fantastic. That means you're actually building, you're breaking down the muscle and building it back up, and therefore it will become stronger.
Yep. Pretty easy. Pretty straightforward. Muscles are straightforward. Yeah.
What next topic? What, bones?
Bones.
So bones are an interesting structure because bones will adapt to the amount of stress being placed on them fairly quickly. And it's not just, and a lot of it has to do with weight bearing. Okay?
Yeah.
Loading the joint. There's such a thing called Wolff's Law, which is essentially the more strain or stress you put through bones, the more calcium buildup and strength and density that will actually start to develop. So like a perfect example of this is like osteoporosis, right? So osteoporosis is just a lack of bone density. Bone is becoming more brittle or fragile. And so the best medicine literally for osteoporosis is weight bearing, standing, moving, walking, those sorts of things. If you have an osteoporotic spine, good, hard, solid muscle contractions into an extended position where you're actually trying to strengthen the back the muscles on the back side of the spine, where you're getting a nice solid strain placed on that on the spine through the muscle attachments. That's the exact thing that you want to try to do to try to strengthen bone. So any strain that's stressed through the bone, more bone will actually be developed and created. So, lots of positive impacts that walking, easy, gentle strengthening exercises can have on bones. If you've had a fracture, if you, like I said, diagnosed with osteoporosis or osteopenia, so bone is all about loading it. Likewise, or I guess on the flip side of this, if you all of a sudden become very sedentary and you lay down and you're bedridden, all of a sudden bone density and bone strength drops significantly. So loading the bones, especially as we are, getting older in the aging population, there should be a lot of focus that is brought to just kind of that loading and weight bearing.
Yep, I think a good thing to think about that is like astronauts when they've been on the space station for a prolonged period.
Good point.
They just start. We're not built for that. Your body will adapt to that environment relatively quickly and cannibalize the things that it's not going to use.
Yeah.
I always like to. Your body's smartness, all it's trying to do is keep you alive. It's not trying to keep you overly mobile or anything like that. It's just trying to keep you alive. So anything it can cannibalize at any point, it's going to cannibalize.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? I don't want to butcher the stat, but I did read something the other day about your point about the astronauts and being in zero gravity and all of that. And I had read someplace, it wasn't really a scientific article. It was just something that I had read just offhanded, but it was talking about one of the recent astronauts that was in space for like 6 to 9 months or something like that, and it took him, to develop like his strength and endurance, and they did bone densities tests, and it took like 9 to 12 months to get that all developed back. But that was all because he hadn't loaded the tissue for a long period of time. So I thought that was really interesting. But some of those numbers that I just threw out there are
questionable.
Well, they're questionable. I mean, they're on the right target, but
yeah.
I can't remember the exact stats. So don't hold me to those ones. But yeah, so loading bones, good.
Yep.
Do it more.
Stand up, walk around.
Mm-hmm.
What do you got? Ligaments?
Yeah, I've got some bad news here too. My phone seems to be almost dying here. So if I get out, you're going to have to finish this guy off. If I get cut off here. So ligaments. Just like everything, right? I mean, the whole theme of this entire podcast is, the more you load structures, what happens?
They get bigger and stronger.
Yeah, they adapt, and typically they develop more resilience, and they develop better tolerance. A lot of studies have shown that people who are big weight lifters will actually have much larger ligaments. Larger ligaments equals more stability. So, you start talking about, hey, I have a torn ligament in my ankle because I rolled it really bad. Okay, well, is it partially torn or is it totally torn? If it's partially torn, well, systematically loading that over a period of time, building strength, et cetera, those things are eventually going to start to build bigger, thicker, larger ligament, because the body will respond to through more strain and stress. The body will respond by building stronger and resilient tissue. So I think that's kind of self-explanatory too, and really kind of jumping around here, but same thing with tendons.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, they're kind of the same thing. They're just connecting things to other things. Yeah,
and they're both non-contractile tissue, which is where it's a little bit different than muscle. But even so, the more strain you place on the tissue, even if you had a partial tear or something that was reconstructed, once everything's healed and you start to systematically start loading the tissue again in a controlled fashion, that tissue is going to become stronger. The key is exactly what I just said there. Systematically in a controlled fashion, meaning that you don't jump from
Yeah.
one huge level all the way to something that's 3 or 4 different levels above what your tolerance is.
Yeah. Day 2, you don't just go in and put all of the weight you can do on a bench press and just see what happens.
Yeah. No. Yeah. You'll have problems and you won't like anyone.
No.
Including us.
No.
So that really covers ligaments and tendons, cartilage, intervertebral discs, so like the disc heights and things. These are all that have been seen to, a lot of recent studies have indicated that there's actually more cartilage that's actually built up for runners, marathon runners, and disc height is actually thicker in individuals who are runners. So those are all things that in the past have really been thought to be something that kind of wears down these types of structures, which in fact they aren't. It actually indicates that, recent research indicates that there is a possibility that doing these things actually improves these structures' health. So the old adage of, oh my gosh, I've got some knee cartilage issue, or I've got DDD, degenerative disc disease of the spine, I shouldn't be doing these kinds of things. There may not be a lot of value to that thought pattern. It may actually be the opposite, that if you can slowly introduce these things, that you can actually get some more buildup of some of the tissue over a period of time. So, I think there's further studies that need to be done into that, but certainly it's not something that is hurting people at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So that kind of covers our major tissues. Anything else you really want to add?
No, just the don't be afraid to load things. Don't be afraid to exercise. Don't be afraid to walk. Don't be afraid to run. Don't be afraid to do things. If you just ease into it. Don't just go in there and run a marathon like somebody I know.
Whoops.
Granted, you had a foundation.
Did I?
You had more of a foundation than Barney Stinson did, I feel.
For those of you who don't know, and we may have talked about this in a previous podcast, I had a terrible bet with my wife. I am a runner. I do like to run, and I haven't ran as much lately, but I do like to run about 3 or 4 miles, maybe 4 or 5 times a week. So I'm not a huge runner, but a couple years ago, my wife bet me through a series of events that I could not run a marathon, and I had to stay on my same training schedule, so I wasn't allowed to kind of start to ramp things up like you're supposed to do. Let's just say I completed it. I won the battle, but I certainly lost the war.
Yeah.
Couldn't wear shoes for a week, and so that's a good indication of overloading the body, even though you're used to a certain amount of stresses, the pounding of running, but too much is too much, and too much is always too much. So,
yep.
Yeah. So, don't be an idiot like me.
I think that's a good one to end on. That's a good note to end on.
Perfect.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not designed to, oh my God, cannot speak. It is not designed to diagnose or treat. When beginning any exercise program, it should be reviewed and discussed with your medical professional prior to beginning. Information on this podcast is not designed to replace medical treatment. Remember, treat yourself.